Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm very delighted to be here with you. I remind all my viewers and listeners that the reason why we come together under the banner of this podcast is to hug humankind, is to recognize the beauty that we are all responsible for in one way or another, the creativity that we put out into the world, and the wonderful things that we've created over the last 6,000 years or 2 billion years, whatever your spiritual predilection happens to be. So, you know what? Take in from this interview the things that make sense to you and that will help you find your own personal zone. Because really, that's what life is all about. It's embracing life, it's loving it, and it's finding your gift, that internal gift that I believe we all have, and running with it. I will remind you, too, please, that there are sponsorship and advertising opportunities through the show. Just simply be in touch with me at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com, which you'll see at the bottom of my screen. I am really, really excited to have as my guest today, Toronto Mike. His real name is Toronto Boon, but we'll go with Toronto Mike throughout the show. Mike, welcome to the show.
Avrum, you're like the king of all media, man. I was just watching that multimedia video. My mind's blowing over here.
So thank you for saying that. It's a real honor to be complimented by you, and I'll let my listeners in to why in a second. That being that you commented on that multimedia piece, I do want to say that was created by my very dear friend Isaac Oziel. Isaac passed away. I think it's probably about 2 weeks ago.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was a young man. He was in his early to mid 50s, and he was highly creative. But even more than that, Mike, he was a man full of what we call in Hebrew chesed, which is kindness. And he did a lot of beautiful things for me. Mike, you know those guys in your life who you can call upon, and they're there in a flash, and you just know that they're going to do for you what you need. And then you ask to pay, and they say, don't worry about it, or they'll charge you like $20 just for the gas time. You know what I mean? You have guys like that, right?
Well, I call those people sweethearts. We need more sweethearts.
We do. We need a world full of sweethearts. And with that, so God bless Isaac's soul. And thank you for coming our way, Isaac. And thank you for that wonderful video. Now, Toronto Mike, the thing that I always liked about you is you really are the guru of podcasting. I would say in Toronto, perhaps Ontario and Canada. And I'm sure that there's an international component to what you do as well. You, as of today, after this podcast, this interview, you will be producing and hosting your 1,619th podcast, correct?
Literally, I'm going to hang up with you, and then I'm going to have Greg Keeler from Blue Rodeo on the program, and that will be episode 1619. Yes, sir.
Absolutely incredible. I just want to let folks know that for over a decade, Mike has been creating a space for fascinating conversations, bringing listeners the best in local culture, sports, music, and more. He has combines a wonderful blend of humor, insight, and candor. And some of his guests have included folks like Mark Hebscher, Dave Hodge, Jim Mckenny, Steve Paikin, Dave Thomas from SCTV, Jay Clemons from Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, Alan Frew from Glass Tiger, who I interviewed many years ago, wonderful guy, Carol Pope, Ron Sexsmith, Erin Davis, Danny Elwell, and so many more.
Wow.
The list goes on and on and on. And if you want to know more about Mike, other than from this podcast, take a look at his website, and it's under that banner, Toronto Mike, and you will see just the litany of who's who from this city, from this province, from this country, and outside of it, having to do with radio, sports. He's created some of his own podcasts. What do you call them? Mike?
Well, what are you referring to, Avrum?
Oh, sorry, your documentaries, Mike.
Oh, Mike'Umentaries.
Yeah, Mike.
Well, yeah, of course. The pen flip got its own Mike'Umentary. Are you kidding me? Speaking of Dave Hodge.
Dave Hodge, and I want to talk about him in a moment.
Oh, yeah.
But all in all, he really is someone who has enlightened us as to culture and media and sports and entertainment in this wonderful city of ours, this wonderful province, and this terrific country that we all live in. So, Mike, first off, I want to say on behalf of all my viewers and listeners, thank you so much for doing it.
Well, thanks for the invite. Let me blow your mind of what a small world this is that we live in, which is that just before I jumped on with you right now, I recorded back to back to back with a client. I produce his podcast. His name is Joel Greenberg.
Joel,
yes. I said just in passing, I'm like, because I told him I was going to talk to Greg Keeler later today. And I said, I'm going to talk to Avrum Rosensweig. And he's like, oh, I talked to him. And I'm like, oh, yeah, like what? How do you know him? You just know him from whatever? He's like, I was on Avrum's show like recently, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So what a small world we live in.
Yeah, the Israelis say the world is so small you can put it inside of a pita. So there you go. Now, you were into podcasting when it really was in as somewhat of a fetal stage, if you will. As I said before, you're doing your 1619th podcast today, which means that for over a decade, you've been ensconced in this really new tool that's being created and allows regular folks to get their voice out there, to get their message out there, their thoughts. How did you get into it? What brought you to podcasting?
Blogging. So I was an early adopter to the blogging, the burgeoning blog format of the very early 2000s. And again, I was kind of fresh out of university. I loved to write. I loved to document. I was a natural born archivist, and I was interested in the technology behind such things as, like writing my own HTML and CSS, and then, building blogs. So I started blogging. And then because I was kind of really into my blog at torontomike.com, I sort of was curious about the new communication protocols that were emerging. And one of them in the pretty early 2000s was podcasting. So to wrap it up, I'm already boring myself, but 2006, I was friendly with my favorite morning show when I was growing up. I loved listening to CFNY 102.1, and I loved the Humble and Fred show. And I was friendly with them because through the blog, I got to know Humble and Fred. And in 2006, they were both without a radio job because radio had fired them. And I basically said, Humble, Fred, I said, you don't need terrestrial radio to broadcast in 2006. We can do it ourselves. If you can broadcast, if you can record quality audio, I know how to take that audio file and disseminate it to the masses via the internet. It is a new burgeoning format. It is called podcasting. 2006, buddy. So that's the beginning. Yes. I started producing their show like a technical producer, and then blah, blah, blah. Many years later, I started my own.
What would you say is the fundamental difference between then and now vis-a-vis podcast?
Well, nowadays you can talk to the great unwashed, the average Joe Blow, and you can say, I have a podcast, and they don't look at you funny. Like now they're like, oh, even 2012, when I started Toronto Mike'D, a lot of people were intimidated by this whole idea that you have to subscribe to this, like this. What do you mean there's a feed I subscribe to? And then it was kind of intimidating, right? Like I remember in 2012, I would put like a play button on my website just because some people, they know how to use their VCRs, right? Like some people, if you go to a link, they can press the play button and noise will come out of the speaker. And if you introduce the whole idea of subscribing, you lose them because it's too much for me, right? So I think the biggest difference is now almost everybody you encounter has tried or knows what a podcast is, like has heard, I don't know, something like Smartless or I don't know, some CBC podcast. Like most people know what a podcast is, but back in the early days, it was pretty intimidating for a lot of people who probably would like to consume your content, but don't know how to listen to podcasts.
Yeah, and I find that the real neat thing about podcasting, and tell me if you concur with this, is at a party, or at shul on Shabbos. You don't mind if I use
I
Jewish terms,
hosted Hebscher on Sports for 5 years. I practically speak Yiddish.
Okay, perfect. I'll invite you over for a Shabbos meal. But what I like is that when I'm with people, as I was at a conference yesterday, a Torah conference, and people say, "What do you do?" and I say, "I host a podcast," and their eyes light up, because I'm not an accountant, right? And I'm not a widgeter. People get excited over it. Are they still excited
like
over
when I'm at
your work?
the soccer game or whatever with my third born's a big soccer head, and we go to all these games all over the GTA, and like the people like to ask you what you do, and you're right. There's the guy who I don't know, he's a mortgage broker, and then there's the guy who who sells widgets, whatever. Yeah,
The insurance
and then
guy.
you're like, oh, I produce podcasts, and it's kind of exciting. Like it's like, oh, like what podcast? And you're like, you'll say, oh, you ever heard of Hebscher on? I guess Hebscher's podcast is actually retired now, but you ever heard of Humble and Fred? I'll be, Peter Gross. I'll talk about Ralph Ben Murgy, your buddy. Like these are, Joel Greenberg, and then of course Toronto Mike'D. And you get it talking about these podcasts you produce, and it's kind of fun to talk about, and people seem interested. And then they ask you who's been in the basement, and that's where for the next couple of hours you're just answering questions about who's been in the basement.
Are you still really driven to do this?
My show, absolutely. I feel like I just
Is it still an excitement for you?
I know it's been over a decade and over 1,600 episodes, but in many regards, I'm only now figuring it all out. Like I feel like we're tip of the iceberg time here. Like now I know. I feel like now I know what I'm doing. So now I just got to get some fresh meat in the basement, and then I'm going to do my thing. So I would say absolutely, I'm just as excited about this show now as I ever was, if not more so, because now I put in the reps. Like I've seen the different personalities, and I think now I have I'm going to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but somebody's got to do it, right, Avrum? So like I can,
yes, absolutely.
I can extract the story from a wide variety of personality types, and I'm pretty damn good at it. So let's go. Let's get this thing going. Let's head for 10,000.
I tell you what I found very interesting, Mike, was that for your 1,000th show, it was a 5-hour marathon of a podcast. And you were actually quoted as saying afterwards, yeah, kind of now I'm sort of figuring things out where to go with this. But 5 hours.
You're shortchanging me, man. It's 5 hours and 40 minutes.
Unbelievable.
And when
unreal. Like I know Joe Rogan's done, I think 3 hour.
Oh, 3 hours is nothing. I get Mark Weisblot down here. That's 3 hours right there. That's nothing. But the 540, I said just in passing it because I produce Humble and Fred show today. So I said to Fred, oh, my 1,000th episode is going to be 5 hours and 40 minutes. And he said, Mike, nobody's going to listen to a 5 hour and 40-minute episode. So I created like a special sticker that I would give to people if they heard the whole thing. They got a special sticker. Like I listened to episode 1,000 of Toronto Mike. And I'm telling you, unless they're lying to me, many people listened to episode 1,000 of Toronto Mike.
You ever see the sticker around?
That sticker I don't see because that one I think I kept it digital, but I had real Toronto Mike stickers. I will occasionally see a car parked somewhere or a sign or something, and I will see Toronto Mike stickers because I used to have a sticker sponsor and I used to give out stickers, and I do see them in the wild.
In terms of your 5 hour show or podcasting in general, one of the reasons I was really excited about talking to you today is because you really are the guru when it comes to podcasting in Toronto. Everybody knows who you are. Everybody's constantly referring me to you. In fact, you and I worked together for a short while a few years back. When you podcast, would you say that the fundamental thing that is most important is curiosity.
I would say 100%, Avrum, you nailed it, buddy. Curiosity, man. And you can't fake that. If you have a genuine, like, sincere curiosity, which I know you have, which is why you're so good at this. And that's why shout out to Joel Greenberg, your past guest. We got to shout out some people, because I can't just be all about Wolf and Murgy on this program.
We will. Yeah.
Although maybe I'll just keep shouting out Peter Gross. That's my go-to. But curiosity is so key, because if you're genuinely interested in somebody's story and they're willing to share, that's magic. Just capture good audio and let's go. That's what I have been craving. Like, I'm craving that authentic, real talk, and a good host with that's curious can deliver the goods.
And what I love too is the ability to make people hear about themselves, because an awful lot of people are never interviewed. Now there are some people who really don't want to. I spoke to Steve Paikin recently, and you've done a number of different interviews with him. I said, Steve, let's do a show together. It's been a while since I've interviewed you. He said, about what, Avrum? I said, well, about your life. He goes, no, I'm bored out of my mind with my life. And I thought, yeah, okay, I get that. I understand. How much do you want to continually talk about yourself, right? But when you have someone on your show and you really ask great questions, and they'll say, Mike, way to go, man. Like, no one's ever asked me that question before. Isn't that a wonderful feeling?
Yeah. And you feel like you're an archaeologist, like you've just uncovered some fossil. And now that you've uncovered it, like, future generations can learn about this species or whatever. Like, it feels like you're doing important work, because, I mean, maybe I've tricked myself into thinking this is something worthwhile, but you're basically documenting, in some regards, the stories of this city that aren't being covered by mainstream media. Like, it's one thing to have the deep dive with Mike Myers. A bunch of places are talking about Mike Myers, but let's talk to the Gravelberries Paul Myers. Let's get that story.
Nicely said. And I agree with you 100%. I've interviewed some stars in the past, the Michael Bublé's of the world, Harry Belafonte. Wow. And I don't enjoy it near as much as the interview I did with my friend Dodie, who's a server across the street at Wimpy's. Not near as much. Are you like that?
In some regards, like, I will sometimes, yes. Like, okay, I'm trying to think recently. So Monday, Alan Gregg came over, and Alan Gregg is a famous guy on some level, but you'd be surprised how many people are like, oh, Alan Grego? No, Alan Gregg. Okay. So I will say one of my favorite episodes of all time, just because I haven't heard long form conversations with Alan Gregg. There's been a lot of Tragically Hip talk in 2024 because of the documentary. And I've heard Jay Gold talk quite a bit about managing the hip before they got the record deal. But I haven't heard from Alan Gregg, who was 50% of the management trust that was responsible for getting the hip that record deal. So just, you have a guy, and you can talk about, he's the guy who approved the progressive conservative ad that looked like it was making fun of Jean Chrétien's polio, his face from his childhood polio.
Oh, yes.
And he took a hit on that, but he did get Brian Mulroney 2 majority victories prior to that. But this man comes in your basement and he sits there, and now your job is to get these stories, and it's quite thrilling. It's quite thrilling. So to answer your question, though, I don't have like Michael Bublé on Toronto Mike'D, but I do see what you mean. Like, sometimes it's these untold stories that you're extracting that are exciting. I feel like if you have Randy Bachman on, which I had once, you're going to get the stories that he's told 100 people. And that's nice enough. It's like greatest hits. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm looking for the rare gems, the nuggets that haven't yet been exposed. Let's get those.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And when someone says, listen, I've never told anybody this, and they're telling it to you with all of your listeners, you're sitting back and thinking, like, you don't smile too widely because you want to be Canadian humble, right? But you're in your head, you're going, yeah, right on. I've accomplished something here. Now, I know that for your podcast, people do come into your basement. So Do you have a side door there that these
Yes,
folks
I do.
enter
Yes.
through?
There's a side door right here. So I always say, knock on the side door when you arrive. And on that front, though, during COVID, I had to pivot and do some remotes that we're doing right now. But I realized coming out of COVID, I don't know if we're really out of COVID, but coming out of the pandemic there, I realized how do I word this? Basically, how much better it was for me to do it in person. Like how much more I enjoyed it. The energy, I feed off the guests' energy. Like I could feed off, we have a pretty good connection here and I can feed off your energy. But if you were sitting right here, whole different ball game.
So George Stroumboulopoulos knocks at your door. Do you go answer it? Who answers
I'm expecting, these are not unannounced guests. So I know that I got a guest. I got a 2:00 guest. So I'm kind of set up at about 10 to 2. And then I'm aware that soon I'll have my guest at the door. And then I always say the same thing when they arrive. I'm like, okay, when you get to the bottom of the stairs and turn right, please watch your head because the ceiling does a big dip. And they usually laugh at that. They a little chuckle. And I'm like, don't forget these words I just said to you. And then they may or may not smash their head against the ceiling. And basically, Avrum, I don't know what you're like, but I don't talk to my guests before I press record. Like, I don't even want to know how they're doing. Like, I'm like, please sit down, put on the headphones. Let's get a quick level check and we're going to get in there. And I don't even want to do small talk.
So have you ever had tall guests smash their
tall
head?
I've had Leo Rowdens down here. He's 6'9". I've had a bunch of tall guests who smashed their head pretty good. Damian Cox smashed it pretty good. I'm pretty sure his blood is still on the ceiling here. It's Damian Cox. I didn't feel too badly, right?
Right. I love the setup. I love the idea. And quite frankly, I happen to agree with you about doing it live. I think there's an aspect of my life right now which makes it a little bit easier not to do it live. And also the complexion of my show is different because I'm interviewing people in South Africa,
right,
in Israel. I have an interview coming up with twins in Zimbabwe whom we actually helped separate. They were born conjoined. When I was running Via Hafta, the Jewish humanitarian organization, and I'm going to do an interview with them. So I can't have them come to my place, but I agree with you. There's that vibe. There's that sense of I'm in the room with my guests and we can really almost physically relate to one another,
you're an international superstar, so it doesn't make sense that everybody's going to come visit you. But I do hyper focus on the GTA. So it'll shock you, the guests I've said no to because they weren't willing to spend, an hour or so in the basement. So, when Obama said, I want to do your show, and he said, we're going to do this remotely. I'm in DC. I said, sorry, buddy. Like, you know my address. You knock on that side door like everybody else.
Good one. And I would say the same to Jennifer Aniston.
She's my guest tomorrow.
Good for you. You know the rumor out there, right? The rumor mill, it's churning. Crazy. Did you hear that rumor?
Which rumor?
That
Obama and Aniston? No, and
yes,
I got a brother who loves TMZ. Like he's always telling me who's having a baby, who's having an affair. And my interest on that actually is like near zero. Like I don't know who's married to who.
I hear you.
I don't care, but this Aniston Obama rumor didn't even make its way to me.
Yes, it'll come your way. Trust me. Your family. I know that you're really, really a family man. When we spoke over the last couple of years, I go, Mike, how you doing? I wonder if you have a little bit of time for me. And I must tell you, always make time for me. You gave me the greatest piece of advice about podcasting, which I carry in my back pocket all the time.
No, but I'm dying to hear it.
Yeah, your advice to me was stay in the game. Because there's a million podcasts out there. There's maybe, 200,000 that are functioning. Of those, 100,000 actually do one or more podcasts a month. You said stay in the game, usually over a year. If you can stay in for that length of time, then your level of success will probably be greater.
I'm wise.
You are. You're a wise man, Mike. Toronto Mike. So I want to ask you about your family in the context of your basement of the podcast. Do they come down there, the kids?
My oldest has a bedroom around the corner. So literally there's a curtain here, and then beyond the curtain, he's got a bed. But they absolutely come down here. Like they're once in a so I do episodes. Sometimes typically my episodes are during the weekday. Can't even talk to you here. I'm too excited about Greg Keeler from the the Blue Rodeo next. Okay.
Yeah,
No.
me too. I can
But
barely
no,
articulate my
typically
words,
I
know.
record during the weekday when the kids are in school, but sometimes there'll be a weekend. Usually these toast episodes I do with Rob Pruce and Bob Willett, these might be on a weekend or a night. And then the kids get very excited. I start the live stream at live.torontomike.com before the recording, and I put on some Brian Eno, and there's a live stream, and they'll come down here and they'll kind of talk on the mics, and then they'll go to live.torontomike.com and see themselves like they're on TV or something. So yeah, the two little ones like to check it out when I record on weekends or evenings, for sure.
And the wife, like, will you be lying next to your lovely wife late at night? You're dozing off, and she'll go, "Honey, who's your guest tomorrow? Maybe I'd like
you know
to
what? You know, she doesn't really do that, but once in a while I'll have a guest that really like. She's like, I'll be surprised by it. She's actually interested, because most of my guests, she doesn't seem to even, I don't know who they are, or she doesn't seem to care. But she was very interested when Roz and Mocha came over, because I guess that's her Humble and Fred or something. And then I had on a couple of people, different episodes, a guy named Sean Jones and a guy named Drew, who were members of a Canadian R&B group called In Essence in the early 2000s.
Yes.
And my wife, who is a little bit younger than me, she was like a huge fan of In Essence when she was growing up in Edmonton. And she was very excited that Frew and Sean Jones were going to be in the basement.
Very cool. Have you ever interviewed your wife?
Don't laugh at this, but when episode 666 came along, I felt, well, no, it sounds like I'm saying she's the devil or whatever. She's lovely, actually. She's a sweetheart. But I actually thought that number was too good to just give to some rando who was next in the calendar. So I said, hey, come chat with me for a bit. Just so I did, just so somebody like I love was episode 666.
I like that feeling. It's a very warm feeling. Did you learn anything new about her?
I don't know. I feel I know her pretty well. I don't know if I learned anything new during the Toronto Mike'D interview with Monica, but we do talk a lot. Like, we've only been married 12 years, I guess, in June, but I still dig her. Like, I'm still way into her, which I think is a good thing. And that means, and because I'm a curious cat, I'm always like interviewing her.
Yes. Once an interviewer, always interviewer, right? It's like you're at kitchen this morning and say, honey, I'm just wondering, how are things going with you lately? Yeah. So I hear you. I find myself sometimes interviewing too much. You know what I mean? Like, I go into that interviewing voice when I shouldn't have, with someone I love, and I go, Avrum, just drop it.
I'm impressed you have an interviewing voice.
Yeah, it's not something that most people would hear, but I hear it in my head, and I have to remind myself, Mike, because I just want to be authentic. That's all I want in life.
Well, the nice thing about authenticity is you don't have to try to be authentic. Like, you just got to be yourself, and it's a natural happening. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. The other thing that always intrigued me about you is usually when I called you or was in touch with you, you'd be picking up your cell phone, and I'm like, how's it going? Good. Avrum, I'm just at Hyde Park right now. I can't really talk. I'm on my bike. Like, you're a serious cyclist, right?
Every day.
What kind of bike?
Okay, so my go-to bike when it's like not snowy or icy or like a big rainstorm. So if it's a dry day, I'm on my single speed. It's a Fuji Feather. I'm looking at it right now, and that's my go-to ride. But on like basically all of January so far, I've been riding my piece of crap mountain bike I picked up for $500 many years ago, and so I rode this morning because I rode my 8-year-old to school, and then we lock her bike up at school, and then I'll pick her up later on the bike. And I rode that crappy mountain bike. So it depends on the weather, but if it's a nice day and there's no ice or snow out there, I'm on my Fuji Feather.
The Fuji Feather, you're way out. You're in Etobicoke, which I love Etobicoke. I love Etobicoke. Michael White band. Do you know Mike? He lives out in Etobicoke. I went to visit him a few times. It's gorgeous out there. But are there hills out there? Because if you only have one gear, how do you manage?
Where are the hills in the city? I've only in my life, because I bike all over the city. I've encountered two hills where I had to get up and start walking my bike. One was Pottery Road when I was coming out of the Don Valley Trail.
Oh,
I couldn't generate
great
the
hill.
energy on the single speed to get up it. I'm not ashamed to say. So I had to do a little walking. And the other was coming out of Scarborough Bluffs. I think it's Brimley. But there's a hill coming out of the bluffs where it was so steep, I simply could not do it on a single speed. I had to walk up it. Brimley Road, I think it's called.
Have you been?
Oh yeah,
in
I've
North
been.
York
So I
riding
biked
your
around
bike?
the perimeter of Toronto. So I mean, I biked to Pickering, I biked to Rouge Park, I've biked to North York quite a bit. I've been in like Yonge and Shepherd area for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And what do you carry with you on your bike?
Almost usually nothing. Like my bike lock is attached to my bike, and usually nothing. If I need to, I'll put on a backpack if I need to carry something or pick something up. But typically, just me and my bike.
Okay, let's dive into some of your guests. People are wondering, who have you interviewed, right? So I am, I'm really fascinated by the fact that the genre, or let's say the demographic that you chose to interview, are really Toronto, Ontario, Canada based. And you've had guests like Gord Martineau, Peter Gross, you mentioned, Mark Hebscher was a big one. These are all people who are extremely well known in our city. One could argue the province, and some of them go national, right? Is there any challenge whatsoever of finding this whole litany of guests that you've been able to secure over the years? Because you're only dealing really with the city. Like how does your research in terms of finding guests?
Well, because we're in Toronto, which is like the media capital of the country, right? Like the national people and the local people are all based here. So it's a pretty endless stream. And the way it works is I'll have somebody on and they'll tell me an interesting story. And then like there'll be names that are attached to that story that I'll take a mental note, like, oh, I need to get that person in the basement or whatever. And then I'll pursue that person and then get them in. And then they'll drop a name. Like it's a good example, like a real life example will be, the Garys, the concert promoters, the Garys. So I'll have like Gary, I had them both on, but Gary Top is on. And then from that, I'll be asked to moderate a panel discussion when Gary Top had a book launch at the Masonic Temple. This happened just pretty recently. And then I'll say, oh, who's on the panel? And they'll give me the list and it'll be like Ivor Hamilton. And it'll be like, oh, I haven't talked to this gentleman yet. I haven't talked to this guy yet. It's not Colin Brunton's on there. And then I'll basically do some catch up and I'll have them on and then they'll talk to somebody. Jeff Silverman. I hope am I getting the right name right? So Jeff Silverman, who's the president of Yuck Yucks? Is that Jeff Silverman?
Oh, that's,
he's the owner guy,
Mark.
but there's a guy, the president's actually, okay. So I think it's Jeff
president,
Silverman. So he comes on, he talks about producing the all-night show on CFMT in the early 80s, and that's with Chuck the security guard.
Yes,
so then now I need Chuck the security guard to come over, and his name is Chad Lawther, and I'll hunt him down, and he'll come over, and so on and so on and so on. So like these episodes are sort of mass producing, like they're replicating sort of in this weird scientific way where now it's like I gotta keep pulling these threads and then there's a whole new universe.
Do you know how to find the Donovan Baileys of the world?
Found me. So he's an example where Donovan found a guy named Jason Portwando who was on TSN for many years. And Jason found me because he came over when I was producing an episode of Down the Stretch with Peter Gross, and I met Jason. So Donovan, I think, had a chat with Jason and said, hey, we need a local studio to do our show. And Jason said, hey, you need to talk to Toronto Mike'D. And then I get a phone call from Donovan, and then the rest is history. So a lot of it is word of mouth and connections. And I met you through Ralph Ben-Murgy, and that's sort of the way of the world. But yeah, so Donovan discovered me via Jason Portwando.
Well, right. So you're a networker, and I think you have to be in this business because we don't have a hell of a lot of people working.
No one works for me. Do you have anyone working for you?
No, I don't. I'm the guy. I do have a guy, by the way, in Bangladesh who does my thumbnails. and he'll do some basic technology for me. And he's a wonderful guy. Prices are very reasonable, and he's a very, very sweet man. You know what's beautiful about working with people from other ends of the world, Mike? You get to know the culture.
Well, that's why I work with people from Scarborough,
and you know,
or North York, or East York, because I get to learn the culture of different boroughs in this big city of ours.
Yeah, and they are different.
Listen, I didn't even know there was a East York, so I'm always catching up over here.
I know. I worked in a shelter there for about a year, and they said, well, it's way out in East York. I said, what the hell's that? You know, when you interview let's say Donovan Dale, we'll go back to him for a second. Yeah, he seems like a lovely man. How deeply will you?
I went so deep, I looked him in the eyes and I said, look me in the eyes and tell me you've never taken steroids. Yeah.
You said that to him.
And he swears he always raced clean. I had, by the way, just because I just remember last summer, Ben Johnson came over. And I remember, because Donovan and Ben were one day apart, I guess, in my calendar. So Ben's down here, and the Ben real talk, like I asked him everything. That was a mind-blowing 90 minutes with Ben Johnson. And then the next day, Donovan came over. We're going to do his show. And I just said, hey, Ben was here yesterday. And I'm telling you, I could feel these just keep me away from that. Like he doesn't want anything to do with that. Like this is the guy who lost his gold medal, lost his world record because he was caught doping. And Donovan had the world record, has the gold medal, and swears to me, looks me in the eyes, tells me he did it clean. I believe him. So he doesn't even want to be uttered in the same sentence as Ben.
Have you been over?
He loves his Great Lakes beer, that guy. I had a great chat with Ron.
Do you find that he's a brilliant, very, very eclectic,
well-read, and good tasting music? And you could talk sort of like Dave Hodge in the sense that you could, and it's funny because they had the same job, right? Dave Hodge, Ron McLean took Dave Hodge's job when Dave Hodge disappeared after the pen flip. And this is going back to networking, this country's media landscape is so tiny. Everything is connected. And once you get that, I'm pointing over here to it's like a giant whiteboard where all the pieces matter and they all connect. And as you pull the threads, you realize, oh my God, the same guy who did the all night show is the president of Yuck Yucks, who's the first employee the Gary's ever hired at the Roxy. Like once you start to connect these dots, you realize it's a tiny little ecosystem, the Canadian media landscape. And somebody's got to kind of shine a light on it all and bring it all to the forefront.
Would you ask Ron McLean about the Don Cherry episode?
He was on before that episode, but Avrum, if you've ever heard an episode of Toronto Mike, I would not have Ron McLean on unless I could ask him about that. Like I wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Like I wouldn't have him on if I felt I couldn't ask him about that's the Remembrance Day comment by Don Cherry that got him fired by Rogers. 100% I would ask Ron McLean about that. That's fair.
Yeah. And are you well read yourself? In other words, when Ron McLean starts to philosophize, and he does, he taught me about agape love, which is this Greek form of love.
Oh, no. Are you kidding me? I'm a bit of a dummy. I'm a bit of a dummy. Like I'm an English major from U of T, and I read just enough to get the degree. Honestly, I'm a bit of a dummy. I'm a curious cat. I'm always learning, but I know far more about the Degrassi Schools Out movie than I know about those names you just dropped. I know more about Archie Andrews' Double Digests. Let's talk about that.
I'm kind of full of shit as
but you can say these names. You know these names.
That's all I know. Oh, I'm the type of guy who knows how to swear in 37 different languages. And when I do it, people get really excited. You're with a Greek guy. You go, oh, Malakis. And then they start talking in Greek.
Do people tell you how amazing you are? Just quickly here is that, you talked about the conjoined twins, and then you talked about the shelter in East York. And every time I look into you, because we got to know each other through Ralph, I learn about philanthropic endeavors and charities you're involved with. And this, basically, I'm like, if I were 10% the guy Avrum is, the world would be better off. You're a sweetheart.
Thank you for saying that. I am really, really grateful to hear that. And I will tell you, I think the fundamental character trait of a Canadian, and God willing, we should, um, is humility, right? I look at you, and we're kind of ingratiating one each other to the other, um, and I'm just mesmerized what you've accomplished. And I look at your website, and I look at your ability to put messages out there, and your information. And I have to tell you, Toronto Mike, like you are really good at PR, at marketing, at design, at getting your message out there. And I think that, thank God, really, I know who I am, and I'm really proud of myself. But I also interview people like you whose CVs are mind-boggling, Mike. Mind-boggling. I interviewed Michal Cutler, who is Israel's envoy fighting anti-Semitism around the world. Before I interviewed her, I watched her speech at the United Nations, and she banged down on the table and she said, "You members of United Nations, you legitimized anti-Semitism and you legitimized, Zionism is racism." And I was like thinking, my God, how am I going to handle this interview? This is a powerful human being. And I'm not sure that I have the ability to do it. I'm a simple guy at Shepherd and Bathurst, right?
Right.
I had a meeting with myself and I asked myself, what do you want to take out of this? And I said two things. Number one is I want to be myself and I want her to be who she is. And however that plays out, that's good. So I thank you for the compliment, but I have to tell you something. There's a lot of people whom you and I hobnob with who are brilliant, and have done unbelievable things in life. So yeah, I think I'm okay. And I've had 3 heart attacks, and I'm lying in ICU every single time. And I ask myself, okay, if I die on this one, am I satisfied with what I accomplished in life? And my answer is yes, I am. Are you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I feel I have some unfinished business because I actually, it's funny. I think if I just disappeared tomorrow, like, how would it be for everybody? And I start running down the list, and then I get stuck at my sweet baby Morgan, 8 years old, and I'm like, she still really needs daddy. Like we're really tight, and we have our, like I said, I'm going to be picking her up on the bike, and I'm like, I got to stick around a little longer for Morgan. Like I can't leave yet. Like I have some unfinished business there, but when it's time.
Do your mom and dad like you?
I was with my mom yesterday, so yes, the answer is yes. Saturday, not yesterday, but anyway, my oldest we had a birthday party for my oldest, and my mom was there, and yeah.
What's up with your dad?
Estranged at this time. Don't have any further detail for you at this time, but
update me if you can update me, please. Yeah,
I'll fill you in when there's an update.
I was talking to someone the other day. She went from being a right-wing, ultra Hasidic woman to someone who's highly secular. And I looked at her. I said, "Tell me about your dad." And she just kind of stared at me, and there was silence. And I realized at that point I should just drop it. Do you ever have that where there's just silence?
Yeah, of course. And those funny thing is, I don't actually ask those kind of questions. Like the whole I won't randomly ask you about your mom or dad. I just simply feel like that to me feels too personal. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm happy. I'm gonna go right at Ron McLean and ask him about the Don Cherry Remembrance Day situation. Like to me, like I have my brain compartmentalized everything into like fair game for public realm, and then things that would be like I would consider too personal to like blindside somebody with on like a live recorded show.
But that's because you're a Gentile, we Jews, it's like we meet someone new and so your mom bought you that house or what, So
but I do know if there is somewhere I want to go, but I think I'm pretty good at going, like, when you're playing chess and you're like 6 moves ahead or whatever, like I'm going to go here because then I can go here. And then I know how to get them to go here, which is where I want to go. So I can't go straight here, but I can go here and there. And then I know how to make them take me to where I want to go.
So that's a really good way of saying it. But when I get into an interview, and clearly this has to do, it's a cultural thing of where I come from. Like I want to finish this interviewing knowing the layers of Toronto Mike. I want to know where you came from. And if we had 3 hours I would ask you what it was like when you were 3 years old or 5 years old, and who were your best friends in kindergarten. Like, I really want to know the depth of a person and their history. Huh?
My best friend in kindergarten lives 5 blocks from me right now. Like, completely coincidentally lives 5 blocks away from me right now.
What's his name?
Joe.
Joe. Okay.
Joe from TO. Hello to Joe.
Are you guys...
What's that?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Joe's oldest son is getting a job at Ridley Funeral Home, proud sponsors of Toronto Mike'D.
So that's a great segue, Mike. Well done. I'm happy you're directing this interview. Really, you did an interview out of that funeral home, right? Or you did a show out of the interview.
Well, kind of, but this never got dropped in the feed. So I did record I recorded conversations with people who loved Joe, not my Joe. Okay. My Joe's still alive, but a different Joe who happened to be the father-in-law of Brad Jones, who is the owner and funeral director at Ridley Funeral Home. So I set up my studio in Ridley Funeral Home. And after the funeral, people who loved Joe would visit me, and I'd sit them on the mic and I would ask them about Joe. And I collected stories about Joe, and then I edited this together. And it was the most beautiful piece of audio I might have ever recorded. Now, it was never shared in the Toronto Mike'D feed because it was never recorded for Toronto Mike'D. It was to share with the widow and loved ones of Joe can listen to this, and I don't know where else it has gone, but you could not have heard it unless you were, I guess, friends of Brad Jones.
Well, what was it like to be recording in a funeral home? I love that idea. I want to do it.
I loved it because Joe had a long life and was loved by everybody, and these people would come over, but it's not just like his kids and his grandkids, but somebody would come by and say, I grew up on Joe's street, and Joe took me skiing and showed me how to ski. And I fell in love with skiing and have been skiing ever since. And even though I moved away from that street like 40 years ago, every time I'm on the slopes, I think of Joe, and he introduced me to this wonderful activity. Like, things like that were coming out, those kind of stories. It was unbelievable.
In your mind, Mike, when you hear those stories and you see those connections similar to the thread that you were talking about before, doesn't it almost seem like we're all connected?
Yeah. And that's why it's tip of the iceberg here, because everything is connected, and it's almost infinite, the number of stories to extract and relate back to others. And in that funeral home recording, I had that idea for years. And I've been telling Brad Jones, and I always say, I set up at the Opera House on the 10th anniversary of, there was a popular Toronto DJ named Martin Streak who passed away. And they had the party for Marty, they called it, at the Opera House. And I set up my studio in the lobby, and then everybody was coming there to basically to dance and celebrate the life of Marty Streak, 10 years gone. But I would get them on the mic to tell me stories about Marty. And I did that years ago. I mean, Strombo was there. It was unbelievable. All these CFNY DJs, David Marsden was there. It was amazing. And ever since then, I had this idea that, this could be a service provided by funeral homes to get an audio documentation of people sharing stories about their loved one who had passed away. And I had wanted to do it for years. And then Brad thought the best test for this would be his father-in-law, because he's it's not a client. It's like, it's his own family. So we did it, and it was better than I had hoped it would be. It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm game for a business. If you want to do it, I'd love to do it. I wonder, when you're sitting there and you're interviewing these folks who just came from the funeral and they're sobbing, they're crying, or other environments, like, how do you see yourself? Who do you see yourself as?
Well, I'm always respectful of my guest, and I always show compassion. And I guess I see myself as like the conduit to extract the stories.
Yeah.
Particularly with those funeral home recording, because I was literally there to ask the right prompts, the right questions to get the stories coming out. And then that's what I'm capturing. But regardless of who I'm talking to, like with Greg Keeler, who's right at, like literally, I'm going to hang up with you and I'm going to talk to him. And I know exactly where I want to go.
Yes.
Like I've already heard the episode in my head. So this will happen. I can hear episodes in my head and then I know where I'm going to go and I know how to get to where I want to go. So I kind of know the segues to get there. And I know how I want to open. I almost always know exactly what I want to get to first. And it's always got to be a bit of a lighter thing first. I can't go heavy first. I got to warm up my audience and build some rapport because usually I'm meeting these people for the first time. But with Greg Keeler, absolutely out of the box, I want to talk about the 1972 Summit Series.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned Ron MacLean, but I've heard stories from Jeff Merrick and Ron MacLean about a unique role that a young Greg Keeler played during the 72 Summit Series with regards to Bobby Orr. And I'm finally going to get a chance to get the definitive true story from the man himself. Like this is an exciting moment for me.
I feel very similar to you. I interviewed recently Ted Nolan, who was a native Canadian first and foremost, and he was an NHL hockey player, and then he was coach of the year with the Buffalo Sabres. He wrote a book, and I was honored to be able to get him as a guest, and I did so through Phil Fontaine, who's the former chief of the Assembly of Nations. And I'm dropping names specifically because I'm honored to know these guys. I really am. And to get their voice and their message out there. And when I was speaking to Ted, he was telling me about what it was like to be a native Canadian playing in the minors out west and how awful it was. And then later on when he was a coach, how throngs of adults in the stands would start imitating tomahawk throws and yelling these awful racist epithets at him. Sort of anti-native stuff. And of course, within those stories, he would tell me the first time he met Wayne Gretzky and how at some point he was a teammate of his. And I felt as though I was an archivist and I was part of Canadian history, both the pockmarks and the beauty of it, you know.
Well, you were. You were doing a service to others because at some point somebody's going to want to hear more from Ted Nolan in his voice. This is, again, we've talked a lot about death in this brief chat, you know, but one of the things I've noticed having done this for 12 years is you will talk to somebody and at some point the person you had a 90-minute one-on-one with passes away. Yeah, and then all of a sudden so what will happen is, and if it's somebody super famous, there might be a 200 places people can go to hear their voice talking about their lives on CBC or whatever. But with many of my guests, the only audio that might exist of them in their words telling their story, it might be a Toronto Mike'D episode. And suddenly the value and the weight of these conversations when the guest has passed away, it's quite something. It's happened several times over the past decade. And I hope it never happens again, but something tells me it will.
So I interviewed a woman by the name of Kitty Cohen, I believe her name was. She passed away at 106 years old. Wow. And 2 weeks before she died, I did an interview with her. And when she passed away, I felt exactly the same as you, as though this was a legacy interview. Right. I'll tell you a funny thing that she said, and you can find that interview on my previous podcast, which was called Hat Radio. And I said to her, I said, Kitty, can I ask you anything? And she said, yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. So I said, at 106 years old, what are your thoughts about sex? And she says to me, I'll tell you, honey. She goes, have as much of it as you can for as long as you can, because there's going to come a time where you don't have any of it anymore. And to me, I mean, that was fun. But the fact that there was this legacy interview that her family could hold on to and listen to over and over, that was just a very, very great honor. So I agree with you on that. So listen, I want to thank you a lot for this interview. I think what excited me about it was I feel like it's podcaster to podcaster. And if anything, it's like honestly, like you're a mentor to me and to many other people, just in the way that you operate. I was going to go down the road of asking you your favorite guests and covering so many people whom you have interviewed. But when we started talking more so about yourself and the ways and the means and the why, your dreams and how you approach things, I just found that so much more interesting. And I'm grateful for that.
Look, I appreciate the invitation. I'm glad we could do this, and we should do it again sometime. If you're not busy chatting with Joel Greenberg again, because he's got a new season of his podcast, Life in Stages, coming very, very soon.
How far into the future are you in terms of your scheduling and your booking?
For Toronto Mike'D, I don't know, only about like 5 or 6 weeks out or something like that. Like, so if somebody today, I like, depend, you know what, I will do a game. Like, if it's an A-list I've been trying to get for a decade, I find room for them. Like, magically, I'll drill a hole in my schedule or whatever. But typically, like, I'm pretty done most of February's bookings. Like, I probably have a bit of space at the back end, but you never know. These bluebirds fall out of the sky, and you're like, I've been trying to. Like, Greg Keeler's a good example. Like, all of a sudden, Greg Keeler's available. Well, guess why he's suddenly available? You want me to tell you a little secret?
Yeah, please.
Well, there's a Blue Rodeo documentary called Lost Together that is, I guess they're going to be, I don't know where it's being distributed. I'll find out from Greg, but it's going to be a 2025 thing. And suddenly the good people at Blue Rodeo Incorporated are eager to raise awareness that this documentary exists. So there you go. One of the things that makes these people available to chat suddenly, it's typically a book is coming out. It's like, oh, suddenly Peter Mansbridge wants to talk. Oh, how interesting. Peter wants to chat, eh? I guess he's got a new book coming out. I'm starting to clue in after 12 years.
Little secret, by the way, for research. I hope no one's listening. ChatGPT has done a lot for me in terms of research. I do a lot of stuff with authors and so on and so forth. And I can go to ChatGPT and ask it to spell out 10 different questions having to do with this author or with this book or with this producer. And it's been very, very helpful. Very helpful.
Whatever it takes.
So yes, in that light, just to conclude, I have been playing with AI for a while. And one of the things that I've done in my shows is asking AI to write a poem about my guests. And generally people respond in the most positive way. And I did this for you. And this poem is called Ode to Toronto Mike. And it's written by AI. Would you like to hear it?
Well, absolutely.
Here we go. At the heart of the sixes where the city beats loud, Mike Boone stands calm in the chaos proud. A voice for Toronto from the streets to the sky. With a mic in his hand, he lets the stories fly. From the pulse of the culture to the laughs and the lore, he crafts a space that keeps us wanting more. Through interviews deep and moments so bright, he captures the essence of Toronto's light. Toronto Mike, the name that rings true, where the serious mixes with humor too. The Mark Hebschers, the Hodges, and Jim Mckenny's charm. Each conversation feels like a warm, familial arm. Jack Clemons, Carol Pope, Ron Sexsmith's song. With each guest, the story grows strong. Music and sports, history and fame. Mike touches turn them all into gold flame. He's a curator of stories, a podcaster's pride, bringing laughter, insight, and moments to ride. Through decade-long years, he's built this place, a true voice of the city, full of heart and full of grace. So here's to Mike Boone, whose podcast stands tall, a Toronto treasure, admired by all us all. With every episode, he's made his mark, an authentic guide to the soul of the dark. What do you think?
I think that would have been better if it was written from the heart of Avrum Rosensweig. I feel like having AI write that, the soul is gone. So I got to give it a thumbs down.
Fine. Bob Ray wasn't big on it either. Canada's ambassador to the UN.
He's been in this basement.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a smart guy.
Fascinating, a very brilliant guy. But I've had women cry. I've read poems to female guests, and they cried. In fact, I did this with a guy the other day, and he had tears in his eyes as well. But I'm happy you didn't like it, because I don't want
to. If you had played a song for me, and let's say it's beautiful song, just heart-wrenching words and wonderfully delivered with great musicianship, but it's performed by AI, no interest. The humanity, we have to hold on to the humanity. I don't let AI even help with my show notes. AI's got no role in this whole thing. I want to touch all the parts. That's the whole point of this. That's the joy. And that poem, I'd rather hear a shitty poem that Avrum wrote than the best poem ever written by some algorithm.
Yeah. So if we do another interview together and hopefully we will. I'm going to write you a really shitty poem. Fair
That's
enough?
what I want to hear. That's what I want to hear. Thanks, buddy.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching and for listening. It's been a wonderful interview, a real moment in time for us Canadians to be able to hear sort of the machinations and how these wheels all connect together in the spirit and in the light of Toronto Mike, who has done well over 1,600 podcasts over the last decade. And take out of this interview what you can. To me, it's the tenacity, it's the ability to stay in the game for so many years, and not only stay in the game, but to love it and to just be exuberant about what you do. So Toronto Mike, thank you so much for being with me. I'm really, really grateful. God bless you and your family, and continue doing the great things that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sei gesund, it's Yiddish for be well, stay well until we meet again. Thanks.